Hello and welcome to the Dark Side. This is Tabitha and TC Storm. We are here with you today. We will be joined shortly by our special guest, Dr. Jason O'Rourke. But being that he is a lead chaplain, coordinator, managerial chaplain at a hospital. He is actually in a bit of a crisis at the moment at the hospital, as hospitals do have, and he's dealing with that currently, and so will join us as soon as is possible. So please bear with us as that process happens. He's actually helping people on the ground at the moment, and so will be with us as soon as he can. Okay, Mr. Storm, welcome. How has your week been?
You know what? The week ended on me getting some good information.
Good.
And if all goes to plan, next week will be ending on a high, and the week after that will be beginning even higher. So, yeah.
Well, next week we'll be joined by a guest host, and the week after also. So if you haven't taken note of that, it does mean that Mr. Storm will be on vacation for 2 weeks, and we will have a guest host for those 2 weeks. So we'd just like to say congratulations. Thank you very much to all the people that make it possible to do this, and we are just really delighted that things can be can happen that are good for you. So that's really good. So today's episode,
this guest host business is news to me. You see how easily I'm replaced?
Not easily at all, because I'm still needing to work on that, but I figured you being on a different time zone, it might be helpful to allow you to actually have a break. That's my challenge. I see what happens. Sorry, I was just looking at an overlay that we have, seeing if it works. Anyway, today we are talking about the topic of church hurt. Let's get down to business.
Before we do, just a bit of housekeeping. If you haven't enabled Facebook to speak to StreamYard, we won't be able to see your comments.
Yes.
So if you want to contribute, if you have anything to say or questions to ask, please grant Facebook the relevant relevant permissions if you're watching us through Facebook. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, no problem. There we go. I've actually managed to edit the privacy also, so we should all be able to speak to one another and see what's happening. Okay, so church hurt is the subject that we are dealing with today. For many of you who know, on the dark side, we've dealt with this subject before over the course of the 3 years that we've been doing, 2.5, 3 years that we've been doing the dark side. And we've covered it in various aspects, in various ways, with different hosts and co-hosts and guests, and looked at varying denominations. And so today we're going to give you just an introduction to the subject again. And then what we're going to do is mute Mr. Storm's mic while he's away from the screen. What we're going to do is delve into definitions that help us out. So just a cursory search of what's in the news for church will bring up a number of situations of things that are going horribly wrong that typify experiences. For many people, the church, and by the church, we're talking about the Christian church, but we could be talking about any religion. It does happen across religions generally. But for the purposes of this broadcast, we'll be talking about the Christian church. The Christian church has done wonderful and good things, provided education, schools, support, loved people through difficult situations, been in horrible places on the ground helping. But there is another side to the church. As much as good has been done, there has been really historical bad been done, and we can talk about all of the historical evils that are done in the name of the organization, the church, and thereby other Christians. And I've said frequently, I'm a pastor, for those of you that don't know, that sometimes it is difficult to be in the world and say you're a Christian, you're a pastor, because people can have really negative connotations. So one of the stories, somebody's going to share with us a story for today, I think. Did y'all see the pastor in New York, the same one who got robbed, who grabbed the woman by the back of the neck? No, praise the Lord, I did not see that. I would not want to see that. Oh, do you see what I mean? It's only been introduction. I muted you. Did you unmute?
Yeah.
And well, already we have stories.
I just want to say, it gives context, really, of why he gets robbed.
Grabbing people by the back of the neck, it's going to happen. I don't know.
You grab me by the back of the neck, I'm going to want compensation. I'm just saying, don't grab people by the back of the neck, and you just might not end up getting robbed. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
Okay, so there are 3 stories that we found just to introduce the subject. The first story is out of Canada. It's out of the Lutheran Church. And there has been an investigation into a pastor who's been accused of anonymously harassing a woman online. And so he's done this not only to one woman, but it seems to multiple women. The harassment is pervasive. It is vile, according to the reports. It is abusive. It borders on child abuse allegations. And the reason I'm highlighting this story, at the moment it's in the investigation stages, and it could be that the online account is not linked to this pastor. However, this typifies a problem within Christian denominations that we've spoken about before here on the show, and that is that there is this frequency with which abuse of women and minors seems to occur, and then the cover-up that goes with this. In this case, this pastor has been suspended, and there is an investigation. So we will see what comes of that, and we can keep up to date with that. The second story that I want to draw your attention to is about a Catholic church priest in Australia. So again, a different country, a different denomination. And within this denomination, he's been working for 50 years. He's 72 years old, but has recently been ordered to leave the diocese, the actual place, full stop period. It's been ordered that this must end. He actually stepped back from his role 2 years ago, and the first allegations of abuse against men started 4 years ago. Now, the police were contacted. Unfortunately, it seems that the reports got kicked around a bit, and then the case was closed. But this typifies another problem within society, but also within the church. Those in the minority positions, for example, people from the LGBTQIA plus community, are often on the receiving end of abuse. They're often on the receiving end of difficult, horrible situations. And it does go unregistered and unnoticed because, after all, you shouldn't be XYZ or what have you. And so people don't often take these things seriously, and that causes an enormous amount of harm. And considering the allegation started 4 years ago, there have been multiple allegations, and he has a 50-year career. This does not pose very well for this particular priest who's been ordered to actually leave the diocese, not just leave the church employee, so to speak, but leave the actual diocese area. And so that's our second story. So the first story, contrasting to the first story. And then finally, this one is an unusual story because I don't think that the events are within the normal scope of everyday activities. So as you will know, this, or you may not know, but this story comes out of Japan, and it centers around the Unification Church. Some people know it by another name, but it's called the Unification Church. And it is in conjunction with the assassination of the former Japanese prime minister. Now, the suspect accused of doing this action has actually highlighted a problem for the country. It seems that the former prime minister was closely associated with the Unification Church, and that is the reason in which he was attacked, because the suspect had suffered under financial burden. So his mother, over 2 decades, had given over 100 million in yen, which works out to about 618,000 pounds, to the Unification Church. And this had bankrupted the family. This activity of just giving endlessly had bankrupted the family. And it calls into question, what is what pressure are the Unification Church putting on their members that this is a situation that this family have found themselves in? That over the course of 2 years, they've given 100 million yen to this church, and the people are in dire need now, and the church is doing okay. And then that then highlighted a wider problem of the systemic links between Japanese leadership in their political system and the Unification Church, and what policies and practices are being put into place that actually support the Unification Church, but maybe not in the best interest of the people of the country. And so this has opened a whole can of worms out in Japan, and I'm sure that our Japanese listeners and followers can correct us and help us to understand it in wider detail. But it does highlight or typify an accusation and a problem that has been laid at the door of Christian organizations and churches, which is that there is a pressure to give money. There's a pressure to excessively give money from those who need it the most. And so you will remember we covered Joel Osteen's church that was closed during the floods in, I can't remember which area it was in the United States, so on and so forth, where he has millions and the people need this access to money, but they are not getting it, but yet still they're encouraged to give. But, and again, these can be complicated issues, but in essence, the financial situations and crisis are one of those things. Now, Shireen has given some light on this story. Houston, thank you, Daniel. Let's see. What's the light on this story? It was during a service. Sorry. I'm sorry, what now? So for those of you who are listening but not watching, Shireen says that this New York pastor who grabbed the woman by the neck and later got robbed, said this started during a service. He said that she allegedly was going to attack his wife and child, so he left the pulpit and grabbed her. Everything about that situation does not read well. I can't even. Oh, wow. Mr. Storm, any thoughts for today on
Yeah.
church?
Well, just that story and Shireen's update. I'm like, yo, I would happily drop my offering plate in that pastor's bowl, because I'm like, that church service must be entertaining as hell.
It just seems off. I mean, yeah, I don't know the situation, so I wouldn't like to pass conjecture over the story. And on the one hand, I think, what Shireen is saying is actually really is disturbing. If it was true that somebody was going to attack, a woman and child in the church service, so the pastor goes down to then deal with and being his wife or not be, that would be distressing. But on the other hand, there is this element of, is that what was happening? Was there a need for what you did? What, there's questions. I've got questions.
No, let's be real.
Questions.
Let's be real here, right? Let's just be real here, okay? First of all, you're getting robbed in the middle of service, and now you grab. I'm telling you, that is not church. That is theater.
I didn't say.
I am not paying. I am not paying offering. I'm paying a ticket fee. I'm paying entry prices here, and I'm like, yo, that's gotta be some entertainment on a Sunday morning.
Stop it. Anyway, listen, I think there are some serious allegations within this particular story, Shireen, and I'm sure we will go and do a little research and come back and see what's what. I think that's probably the best.
No, I know the story. As I said, I haven't seen the video, but I know the story Shireen's talking about, right? And I'm just like, look, let's be real here. If trouble following you like that, I'm sorry, you gotta be doing something. You gotta be doing something.
As a pastor, I'm going to say I haven't been doing something, but trouble has followed me on occasion. It has.
I ain't seen you robbed. I ain't seen you robbed yet.
I've never been robbed I've never been robbed at church. And while we have to put,
and I ain't seen you grips up nobody when you have had plenty of reasons to grips people up. Yeah,
I have not gripped up anybody. No, this is true. I have not partaken. But there have been situations where the atmosphere and the
Yes.
behavior of our members has led to
Hmm.
exit plans and strategies on how we're going to
Hmm.
survive the Sabbath, and
And
what happens if
and
the police need to be
me
called.
having to get in people's face. Yes,
You having to
absolutely,
size
absolutely.
up to
But
your
I ain't the pastor.
self.
But I ain't the pastor. So this guy the pastor, yeah. So I gonna do what I gotta do.
Well, yes, but I think it's indicative of the fact that, while we're smiling, and obviously we can make a joke, there are situations in which church members do feel entitled
Hmm.
to behave any way that they feel is right
Yeah.
towards the persons and the people's family who are leading. And I
Hmm.
think that is a separate show. It's a completely separate show. Today's show is about how the institution hurts people. So what I want to say about the three stories and kind of introduce this subject area is that systemic injustice, systemic failures, systemic issues, systemic challenges leads to personal victimization. So again, systemic injustice, leads to personal victimization. If a system does not have adequate or has inadequate resources to hold itself accountable, to make sure that there are proper processes in place, then people will take advantage of that system and do harm. What does that mean for the local person? It means that you locally can experience systemic injustice, systemic problems, but the victimization of those are enacted upon an individual. And so when we talk about systemic issues, like church hurt, where we can see that the localized problems of individuals who are problematic and who do problematic things, that does not discredit or does not set it aside from the fact that while that needs to be dealt with and those crimes need to be held accountable, there is a system within which they operate that allows for this pervasive victimization of local individuals. So that for me is the definition, if you like, that I'm working with when I'm looking at the subject of church hurt, because we can't take away from the fact that the church has become, and again, I'm going to say this is about the Christian church, that's the one we're talking about currently, but apply this where you can to other institutions. I think it is equally valid.
Right.
Mr. Storm.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I asked you earlier if you had a definition for church hurt, and at the time you didn't. And you've come up with one now, and it's interesting that we have come to somewhat similar definitions. I wanted to get Dr. O'Rourke's definition of church hurt, because one of the things that I noticed when I was trying to find out some information and views and opinions on the subject is that very often people that were talking about it on an individual level. And I find that to be very problematic. So I'm just going to give you my definition of church hurt that I came up with.
Okay.
It's injustice and wrongdoing for which there has been no responsibility, accountability, restitution, and transformation at an institutional level, and to a lesser degree a personal one.
Okay.
Okay. And I think that those areas, the responsibility, accountability, restitution, and transformation, are important factors when talking about church hurt, and important areas of when dealing with church hurt. And the reason why I say it's at an institutional level is because churches often have measures in place to deal with conflict should they arise between individuals. The problem then occurs that these measures often fail. So you can have people within a church that are constantly hurting the church body at large or an individual. And it is very rarely that somebody will get expelled for hurting church members. but yet let a young teenage girl get pregnant, or even a adult single woman get pregnant, they're going to kick her out of the midst of the church, right? And so for me, I find issues where we are allowing toxic people in an environment, and actually someone who's probably vulnerable are those that we want to exclude. So we will take the measures that we have to remove people from our midst over issues such as I said, a teenage girl getting pregnant, but we will not remove somebody who is constantly toxic to either an individual or to the body at large.
Okay, so Daniel's asked if you can post our different definitions. I've posted mine. I think there's a spelling mistake, but forgive me, I typed while I was writing, so I apologize while I was talking. Apologize while trying to listen and type at the same time. And then Mr. Storm will do his as the moment arises. So yes, thank you for that. Our next question is, can an institution include an entire individual church or church board? Yes. Yes, I believe that an institution, I think, see, and this is where it's difficult and where church becomes murky water. It depends on the church. So, of course, in some denominations, we're talking about systemic failures of an entire denomination. So there are processes and procedures in place in the denomination to account for that. Now, what we've spoken about here on the dark side is that most church activity happens in small to medium-sized congregations in local settings. So you're talking about no more than 100 people, 20 to 100 people in a local area in which that church operates. Can that be an institution? Yes, depending on the longevity, but it depends upon the actual church association. So sometimes it is an institutional failure because that church belongs to a network of small churches. So a denomination, a network of small churches. But then it can be an institution if you say take a mega church in which you have thousands and thousands of people working in that way. It can be an institution if it has a very formal process of operation for the church processes. Some churches actually don't have very formal processes for how they do things. And so I think for me, when we talk about institution, it can be institution of church as in the Christian world. It can be denominational. It can be local church, because there is almost an automatic set of standards that we apply to the institution, right? And so that happens within each organized, because they are organized. They're often not, we're not talking about front room groups. Most times we're talking about organized meetings every week in a locale with a board, with some sort of organizing committee. And it's within that institutional setting that you have, and what I would say is the personal victimization that happens within those settings. But the systemic issues are often wider than that one local church, because the pastor will be employed by a various denominational employment, could be there under any guise. So that would be my answer to that. Do you have a definition for that, Mr. Storm?
Can an institution include an entire individual church board? Absolutely. Oh, yeah.
No, that's fine. Okay, so the next question we have, or is the issue with the pastor that does that automatically qualify as church hurt? It does to me. Okay, so remember, for us, what we're talking about is systemic injustices, a system of power that leads to the abuse of an individual. Okay, so this could be the abuse of many individuals, one individual. In the case of the Canadian church, let's say it was the systemic abuse of the native people of Canada. It could be and we've talked about the three issues. These are individual people who are taking advantage of a broken system and who are able then to inflict. So it can be a individual pastor who hurts another person, and that qualifies as church hurt. Yeah.
Yeah. So the way I see things is that people can get upset at what a pastor says. That's fine. We're people. We're going to have different opinions, different views on things. You might catch us on a bad day, right? And so for me, I don't necessarily include church hurt to take a one-off instance. It would have to be something severe for me to include that as church hurt. For me, what it is that if the pastor did something, well, I mean, if you did something to upset me, I just ain't feeding you. But say another pastor did something to upset me or hurt me or wound me, I will go to that pastor and speak to them.
Yeah.
And there should be policies and systems in place that should allow me to address what has happened. For me, the church hurt occurs where those systems and policies break down, are insufficient, or just totally ignored. It's not necessarily the fact that pastor said something to upset me, pastor hurt my feelings, because I should be able to go and speak to the pastor or whichever church member it is. And we have policies in place within our denomination in which you can go and you can speak to the person alone. If that doesn't work, you take an elder with you to help you resolve the conflict, So there are systems and policies in place. Now, for me, the church hurt occurs where actually the brother knows that they've done wrong. The elder knows that they've done wrong. The church board knows that they've done wrong. The church body at large knows that they've done wrong, and then are silent in it and allow that injustice to continue. For me, that is where church hurt occurs. And so that is why my definition included those 4 areas. Because actually, if we're going to deal with the church hurt, then we need to address those areas. I'm like, if somebody upset me and I went and spoke to them and they said, yo, bro, I didn't mean to do that to you. You caught me in a bad day. I'm sorry. Hey, it's squashed. But I think also what this does is it brings up another failing of why is it that it's not a safe space for people to do that and resolve their conflicts.
Yeah, for me, the issue is over victimization. So that's why I put that as part of my definition. And that can be done by a pastor, but it can be done equally by a church member. It doesn't have to be a person in leadership. We know of the main person in leadership in a church scenario. So if you're new to churches, there tends to be a main person, priest, pastor, deacon, elder, whatever the title is within that denomination for the leader of the organization, and therefore a board. But it can also be volunteers and other people within the church. The characterization for me of church hurt is about the victimization. So this point of disagreeing, we're gonna have disagreements. There'll be people who I've worked with people who absolutely cannot bear the theological positions that I take. They find me just totally unnecessarily conflict. We do not agree with your theological basis. That's fine. We still work together. We still, get on with the work of what we're doing. We just have a difference of opinion. There's no problem to that, and we can disagree with a lesser or whatever degree of passion to that, depending on the issue. So the disagreement kind of aspect where people are, generally there is this human element of I don't get on with everybody in the entire world, right? Some people you click with, some people you don't. All sorts of reasons why we have those. For me, the element that really sets church hurt apart is this idea of victimization. The 3 stories that we covered talk about that victimization. It can be the victimization of minors. It can be the victimization of women. It can be the victimization of men. It can be the victimization or abuse of financially of people, and so on and so forth. It's not limited to these areas, but these are just the typical areas that it often comes with. And victimization means that not only is there an individual conflict, an individual abuse, an individual wrongdoing, but then there is no, as you say, then no responsibility, accountability, restitution, transformation. There's none of that happens, because instead of supporting the victim, what often happens is they rally around the abuser and they hide the abuse. And so the victim is actually victimized by the organization, local church, wider church, community, doesn't matter how you describe it, but there's often this repeated abuse of the individual. So in the case of, minors who've been abused, people aren't believed, they're not investigated. The pastor maybe just moved on to another diocese where they do the same action again and again and again. And this idea that the community isn't actually holding this person accountable, calling the police and having them shipped off to deal with that is problematic. So that, I guess, is for me the key element there. Another point that's been raised here is the word unapologetic should be in those definitions. Yes, I think, yes, in saying that there's no responsibility, accountability, restitution, and transformation is saying that they are completely unapologetic about their actions.
Yeah.
And oftentimes are, as I said, repeat offenders. It's not one-off.
Yeah.
Repeat offenders.
As I said, I think it's inferred in my definition that you have to be apologetic. If you're going to take responsibility, being accountable, make restitution, and then seek to transform, you can't do that without being apologetic.
Yeah,
and absolutely. Sincere in what you're doing.
100%.
But yeah, I believe Daniel's right in saying, you have to be apologetic when wrongdoing comes or within your organization. It's highlighted.
Yeah, I think this goes to a wider issue that we have around what it means to be apologetic in some ways. And we've had this discussion in recent times because we've had the passing of the Queen, and there are people who were not celebrating the Queen's passing, or we're not mourning the Queen's passing, I should say, or we're celebrating the Queen's passing, however you want to say it. And one of the reasons was because for this unapologetic nature that the monarchy and the Queen in particular have held towards its former colonies. People say, oh, but it wasn't her personally that went and, colonized for however many years. She's just the reigning monarch at the time. But what does it mean to be apologetic? And I think that that's something that institutions, organizations across not only church, but across the globe in various institutions really struggle with this idea that I may not have done it. It may not be me personally. I may not have contributed. And we can argue that the Queen has her own history and legacy of what she should have been apologetic for. But the reality is that this is a question that is definitely on the table about this idea of what does it mean if your institution is guilty, is culpable, needs to be held, is responsible, needs to be held accountable for something that has caused harm? If you are the current leader, what does it mean to be apologetic? And I think that's a question that has been raised time and time again, particularly around issues of racism and sexism and colonization and church and other things. That's something that needs to be dealt with.
Look, it's not rocket science, people. I can give you a simple analogy, because people that refuse to apologize and say it wasn't me are not actually being sincere in what they're saying, right? So, for example, one of my children does something wrong, right? What happens? Somebody comes to me and says, yo, your child broke my window. What's the first thing I do?
I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh, I cannot believe it. Thank you, Lord, we live in a place that has insurance.
Right? But then what's my next step?
I'm going to go deal with my child. I'm going to go
make restitution.
I'm going to...
Right. So there has to be some restitution, right? So people that say, hey, it wasn't me.
Transformation, right?
Right? Oh, there's transformation. Trust me, child. That my front door closing when you get home. There's gonna be some transformation going on in my house. But
new rules surrounding how you are outside of our house. That's what will happen. Just for those who are unclear. Yeah.
Brother Dr. Jason.
Hey, I'm sorry.
Dr. O'Rourke.
This is a bit late. No, you're fine.
I feel like
we have.
All right.
we have introduced you already and said why you're late to today's session, that you are dealing with, you're on call.
Whatever they said about me is probably only half true. It's
Well, we introduced you as Dr. Tracy O'Rourke, which is
Yeah,
true.
yeah.
And we've introduced you. And this, I didn't get your title quite right. So this was the half truth. I
That's
said you were managing leadership of chaplaincy at a hospital.
That's true. That works. It's
Okay.
fine. It's fine.
And that you were on call and you were dealing with a crisis situation and doing the job of working with people.
Yeah.
So, yes, Dr. O'Rourke. Sorry, or do I call you Chaplain Dr.
I hate you
O'Rourke?
right now. I really don't like you right now. I don't like you. I don't like you.
That's all right. Join the queue. No, we've gone through, and Tabitha and I have both given our definitions of what church hurt is, because when I was doing some looking around to find information on this, I couldn't find a single definition, and I definitely couldn't find one that I was personally happy with.
Right.
So I've created my own, but I was wondering, do you have a definition of church hurt that perhaps we can use for a framework with which to work?
So I haven't formulated a definition. I think that if I were to, my experience with church hurt is that it is predicated on the assumption of safety. It is equally predicated on church being the core of my life. And so when I start dealing with church hurt, it's a lot more, it has a lot larger impact when my life revolves around church. And when the thing that my life revolves around, I assume is a safe place. And so those two for me, those are the two things that I had to just adjust and just kind of address for me. Why does my life revolve around church? And why do I assume that the place is a safe place?
Yeah, the question of safety was one that was raised. Okay, all right. So betrayal and safety. Okay.
All right, I'm trying to write this down for our listeners. Betrayal, how do I say? Trying to do my spellings.
And do you mean that at an institutional level or personal level? Because the hurt and the betrayal can work on both a personal and an institutional level.
So the way that I was brought up in the church, the two were the same. The individual level of hurt happens within the institutional framework, if you will, because the way that it was presented to me, and I don't think we do it. Let me not say how I think we do it, but the way it was presented is, this is the place where things are done right. This is the place of rightness. And so if you're in the right place, you should be treated rightly. I know that's not a word, but you get what I'm saying. You expect to be treated according to the right standards of right ethics and right morals because of the claims of rightness. And so when someone mistreats you in this right place, how is that addressed? How is that addressed? Because what they did was wrongness. But we can't have wrongness within the right place, among the right people who allegedly do the right things and have the right intentions. So what do we do when wrongness happens? And I feel that in that frame, the my experience has been that we attempt to defend the rightness and the right place and the right title and the right intentions at the expense of the person that has been wronged.
Okay. Now, you touch on a question that I actually have regarding church hurt. I don't know if Tabitha wants to share with you her definition of church hurt, just so that you can understand some of the frameworks that she's working within.
I can. We can go back to this. I can actually put it up on the screen. Look at this. Definition of church hurt from myself is systemic injustice that leads to the personal victimization of individuals within the system. So that for me is what you're looking at. Of course, that can be within any system, can be applied, but within a church system, I like the aspect, I would add that now, listening to you, is the aspect of rightness. You know, within the victimization of individuals in a setting in which there is the idea that it is right, whatever happens here is good and right and safe. And I think that that's an interesting part of the definition. But for me, that's at least the basic definition of hurt, especially because one of the important factors for me is there are often systemic problems. We mentioned 3 news stories at the beginning. I'll tell you about those later, but we mentioned 3 news stories that covered systemic issues: the abuse of women, the abuse of children, the abuse of LGBTQ people, the abuse of finances of people. These are systemic problems because we see them repeated again and again and again and again. So there is a systemic issue within Christian churches, which is the label that we're working with, that allows for this, that hasn't been addressed. But there are individuals who are being hurt by those. And there are individuals who are actually taking advantage of that situation. And so for me, the wider definition includes the idea that what happens is if there is a systemic failing, an individual then can take advantage of that systemic failing and then thereby victimize someone in a local situation. And so they're taking advantage of a gap in the system and doing that. However, Mr. Storm's one, let's see if we can get this. I think this is yours. Do you want to read that out? Shall I read that out for you? Injustice and wrongdoing for which there has been no responsibility, accountability, restitution, and transformation at an institutional level and to a lesser degree at a personal one.
I think both of those are actually beautiful and very accurate. I appreciate the difference between that, because you said, Tab, systemic instead of systematic. And I appreciate the notion of systemic, and the reason why is because systematic gives a level of intention, whereas systemic, I don't have to assume someone's negative intention. I could, but I don't need to do that at this time. But the idea even of a systemic problem really demands a reevaluation of rightness. I cannot have millions of dollars being handed out every year, covering up, not covering up, that's not what I want to say, but doing something. I don't know what it is, but doing something for a consistent injustice that has been happening throughout.
Yes. Yeah.
And still claim rightness at a systemic level. That is unreasonable. That is a faulty goal. That's a faulty aim to say this is the institution of rightness.
Yeah.
But we have this systemic problem over the X amount of years that multiple peoples have experienced.
Yeah.
So, I think that this is the systemic thing I find very appealing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I actually would delve into the systematic versus systemic. I think that's an interesting little side topic, but I'm going to park that idea and let it rest in my brain for a while.
Yeah. See,
ask his question.
Well, you see, I think that's the difference, because you guys get a paycheck from this institution. I don't. So I have a lot more freedom to say these things. Look, I not necessarily, and I'm not excluding the denomination for which you guys are employed by either, but I do think it is systemic and systematic. And we look at that from what's the Methodist, the report from the Methodist Church that came out, and how people said, and it comes back to a question that actually I have, and Jason touched on it, that I wanted to ask, which is that church hurt seems, or the current approach to church hurt seems counterproductive. It seems as though it's self-sabotaging its own intentions and your own intentions and aims. And by that, I mean, as Jason, sorry, let me give him his full title, Dr. O'Rourke.
Come on.
As Jason says, you know, we cannot be spending millions a year, and I'm speaking of our own denomination, millions a year to buy people's silence. You know, Jason doesn't want to say cover up, so I'm going to say buy people's silence on the wrongdoings of the church. But those wrongdoings are going to eventually come out.
Here's a question.
Okay.
So I'll go with you on systematic. The question is, to what degree or in what area is it systematic? Systemic, absolutely. So we'll take myself. I am a survivor of child molestation. It happened in the church. Do we have a systematic child abuse scandal in the church? I would say
an intentional one.
Right. Yeah, no. Right. I would say no, not a systematic one. Do we have a systemic one?
100%.
Sure.
Right. Now,
sexual abuse, period. Sure, no problem. Do we have a systematic challenge in addressing it? Yes. And I think that is where so I have a colleague that shall remain nameless, and I shall not get too specific into this scenario. This colleague's child was abused in the church, and the colleague was told that he or she and the family should not say anything by the leadership of the conference because of the demographics in which his church was, from which his church was made. And so that could bring about a whole lot of legal issues for the church and blah, blah, blah. So the colleague left ministry because the systematic response to a systemic problem caused a secondary injury.
Right.
Okay.
So I think the systemic problem is in the response. The systematic problem is on the front side.
Right.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate. No, not play devil's advocate. That's not what I'm doing. No, not playing devil's advocate. But I'm going to just stick my 2 pennies worth in here at this point and say, I think it depends on the issue. Some issues are systematic. The eradication of people groups at the hands of the church, the abuse of children in an entire nation group at the hands of the church, be that whichever denomination it was, the indoctrination of people in that way is something that we have to deal with in the church situation. And so I think that is an issue that we have to account for. So there are systematic challenges that we have. There are also systematic theological challenges that we have. So the abuse of LGBTQIA people and the abuse of women come down to theological problems within. So they become systematic because you're actually almost encouraging your people to abuse people on the basis that their existence is wrong. And so I think there is a systematic problem. There are other issues which are systemic and not systematic. But the systemic problem and that element of systematic is the systematic problem is that we do not deal with any kind of abuse. And so there is this systematic denial that abuse exists. So for me, that's where I would say, for me, that's my 2 pennies worth into the 2 verses. And the reason I picked systematic over systemic is because I think it goes kind of to the institutional level of hurt that's caused, but the systematic nature of that applies either in a particular topic area or in general, the fact that Christian churches really do a terrible, all denominations, you can't even call out one, all denominations do a really crappy job of dealing with pain inflicted by the organization on the individual. They across the board, it's a historic problem, and it continues onto today.
Right. Right. So I think it's a interesting distinction that Jason makes in terms of the systemic and the systematic. The systematic being the response to the systemic, right? How they deal with it. For me, I don't make that distinction.
Okay.
And the reason I don't make that distinction is because you're aware of the systemic failures. And if you're aware of the systemic failures and allow it to continue, then it's intentional. And so for me, I don't make the distinction that you do in between the two, because it's like I see a house burning down, and it could be a systemic, hey, there was something wrong in the electrical wiring, that's systemic, and I stand there and do nothing. I know the cause, I know the problem, and I do nothing, then actually I am doing something intentional. My inaction is intentional. And so that's why I don't make the distinction between the two, because for me, I see inaction as an action. And so if you choose inaction, then it's intentional. So I hope that answers your question, because you asked, about the systemic and systematic. So
it's good.
Yeah. But the question I was, or the point I was trying to raise, the question I was trying to raise was, is not the current way that the church deals with church hurt counterproductive to its own aims? So what I was saying was that you'll pay however much money to keep people silent. You don't want to damage the reputation of the church. You don't want to, and we saw this in the report of the Southern Baptist report. They wanted to protect the reputation. We've seen this within our own denomination, where people do things to protect the reputation. But things so egregious are going to come out. There's no hiding it. And so in the long term, is our approach to church hurt, our current approach to church hurt, not counterproductive? Does it not, in the long term, just end up doing even more harm to the reputation of the church, rather than coming out, holding our hands up and saying, we got it wrong, we need to make changes, we need to apologize, we need to do our best to make restitution, and just being honest about it? Because one of the things that was coming out in the Southern Baptist report was that a lot of these women just wanted an apology. They wanted somebody to recognize the hurt and harm that had been done to them, and they weren't. So, that's my question regarding our current approach to things.
So, I hear your question, and I'm not going to say I disagree with it. I think that the systematic responses that we get are based on, to stay with those two words, a systematic and systemic misidentification of who the church is made up of. If I teach and preach a message that says we are better than everybody else.
Mm.
That says that if you try and you work and you effort and you are partnering with the Holy Ghost and all this other stuff, if I preach this, and I'm not against the gospel. I believe the gospel changes lives 100%. And I believe that the lives that are changed are lives that are fallen. And I believe that sanctification, according to people that theologians, is the work of a lifetime, which means then I have to have a message that allows for the concept of healing people who are still sick in my environment.
Mm.
And if I have a message or even a policy, right, or a practice that assumes the safety of everybody involved, I've already set myself up for a significant pain, because when somebody drops the ball, here we have church hurt. And now I have to hide the narrative because I'm too proud to apologize. Right? So for me, the response that we see, and we could go Methodist, you could go Southern Baptist, you do Southern Baptist, you could do Adventist, you could do you name a denomination, you could do Muslims, for heaven's sake, no disrespect to the Muslim population of the world, you could do Buddhists, name one, right? When the presentation of the ideology assumes that once a change event has taken place, that there is no relapse in behavior or ideology, you are now in a place where you can only have church hurt, because somebody's going to drop the ball at all times. And now, because we've claimed that we're right and everybody's wrong, we have to figure out how we're going to remunerate at minimum the individual offended and injured and abused, and simultaneously save face. And so for me, the problem starts back in the ideology that hides, that we hide behind. We hide behind our theology. We're not honest about it. We hide behind it. We make proclamations because we claim a belief system that in practice we struggle with. But we want to defend the belief system. But the belief, people could, if I spend my time defending a belief system, I don't have enough time defending people. I have no way to provide for safety because there's no upfront accountability. There's no upfront vulnerability. It's not safe to say, I love the Lord, I declare that I'm a saved person, and yet I struggle, so someone hold me accountable so I don't injure anyone in the room. It's not safe to say that. And so when all we have to say is, I belong to rightness now I must suppress whatever wrongness I have. I've just created a toxic environment by default. Church hurt is inevitable. So any policy that we have to remunerate or to rectify church hurt has to start back with the ideology of who we are. And we have to humanize ourselves. We have to stop deifying ourselves, because that's what we're doing. We have a theology, which is a study of God, that we turn around and theologize ourselves as if we're studying ourselves and not studying God. And we ourselves are fallen, frail, fragile, filled with pain and toxicity. And we come together to study God, and hopefully you see God in me and I see God in you, but that don't mean I can trust you tomorrow. I still have to be accountable to you, Storm. I still have to be accountable to you. Depending on the day, I could have a really horrible day, and you trusted me with your kids. What happens if I have a bad day?
We all having a bad day.
But you understand what I'm saying? That's my point.
Yeah.
It's that for me, as I move forward, part of the issue that I've had to address is my issue of expectations of the church. I don't care what they declare about themselves. I care who they show me they are.
Well, I am. Because you use the example of a bad day, and you're talking about the accountability, and this is one of the things that I said to Tabitha earlier before you joined us, was that I'm not so concerned about the individual to individual, because we have systems and policies in place for that. For me, if you did something, so let's take the example you're looking after my kids, you have a bad day, I'm going to come to you and speak to you about that, because that's the accountability that I'm looking for. The responsibility is for you to own it and say, yeah, you know what? I was having a bad day. I was wrong. And we can deal with that. We can move forward from that position, So, but as I said, I said, why isn't it safe for us to do that? So, there's the question of safety. But for me, the real issue of church hurt comes in where, say you've had the bad day and I come to speak to you, and then you don't take responsibility for that. Now there's a system in place in which I meant to go to the church elder and say, can you come with me to speak to Brother Jason about this? And the elder comes, and then they recognize that actually, Jason, you're in the wrong, but say nothing and do nothing. So it then goes to the church board, and the church board repeat the process of saying nothing and doing nothing, although they know you're wrong. And then the church body at large. For me, that is where the church hurt kicks in, not necessarily the interpersonal wrongs that we do each other, because, as I said, if we come to each other and speak to each other, there should be. But it's where, in that process of me and my family, my children having been wronged, that the church and the institution doesn't call it out. That's where the church hurt, in my belief, tends to kick in, because everybody can see the wrong done to me, and everybody stays silent, and nobody does anything about it. And so, it's the individual. I'm like, yeah, look, brother to brother, brother to sister, whatever. We'll sort that out in the wash. For me, it's when those wrongs are compounded by the silence of everyone around.
I agree. And my thing is, before I could even get to that action, the silence of everyone around is predicated on an assumption.
Yeah.
And it's predicated on the assumption that we're right.
And you expect right.
And you expect right. And then you defend.
Right.
No, I guess, but you defend the idea, you don't address the reality. Right. And that's where, and that there, if so let's take when we work together, the three of us in the Netherlands, right? In the Netherlands, three of us we work together. We just come down and just keep it raw and real and 100. And our members know us for that. So they know, don't come up to us with foolishness. We know they do, but they know that's not how we lead. They know this.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying? And so from a leadership position, they know the three of us are authentic, transparent, we are vulnerable, we are accountable. They know that. And if I'm going to be that, then you're going to be that. And from a leadership standpoint, we do not present, listen, hear me to all the people in the Facebook world. We don't present rightness. We present righteousness. And righteousness, which is about humility and the grace of God, allows for accountability, vulnerability, transparency, integrity, and all those other things. When you present rightness, you can't have those things.
Yeah.
Right.
I just wanted to pick up on something you said, which I thought was really key for our listeners today. And I also see that we have 2 comments that I want to bring in, but just before Mr. Storm takes this question, nip in. You talked about the idea of rightness then leading to you coming into a situation as an individual. And because you have to be right, you suppress any wrong that you have or any weakness that you have in. And then that leads to an almost inevitable outbreak of wrongness, so to speak. Could you touch or expand on that point just a little bit more? Because I really want our listeners and viewers to understand that, what we're talking about is everyone has their issues. Everybody in the world has their particular personal issues, challenges, etc. What I want them to understand the process of what it means to suppress that and why it then means that there's an inevitable outbreak of bad behavior or wrong behavior or whatever, however you want to describe it.
Okay, so then I'll say, so without being overly theological, I'm just trying to be biblically correct and honest to the human experience.
Yeah.
Every single person has epigenetic hand-me-downs that from their nurture stuff that supports epigenetic hand-me-downs, and then they have decisions that they make that can create habits, etc., etc. Right? They have these three predominant things that they have to address or deal with on the epigenetics, which you didn't ask for, the environment that you grew up in, which you didn't ask for, and then your choices in order to survive that business, which means by default, every single person has some level of trauma, whether you're upper middle class or you're dirt poor lower class. It doesn't matter. You have some level of struggle dealing either with your epigenetics, your environment, or your decisions. That's just what it is. If I look at that and I come to Jesus and I say, Lord, thank you for salvation. Thank you, whatever. I didn't suddenly die and become an angel. I have been accepted, but now comes everything else that Paul said, being transformed by the renewing of my mind. Man, I think bad. I need my mind renewed. Really? Submitting myself to the discipline and the admonition and the encouragement and accountability of the brethren. Really? I can't be an island anymore. I beat my body into subjection. Really? I just can't follow the flesh any old way that it wants to go, even though I'm not necessarily doing the most egregious sins. I still have things that I do that are wrong, that are naturally wired into my frame, that I'm used to dealing with. Yes. Those are all things for which we need accountability. Perfect illustration. I could use racism, and that's too easy. Let's just use sexism. The average male has been epigenetically inherited down to be a sexist. The average male in the West has been environmentally nurtured to be a sexist. The average male at some point in his life has done or said something that is sexist. Just because I came to Jesus doesn't suddenly mean I stopped being a sexist. It means that I am saved, and now Jesus is going to walk with me in life to see my sisters as of equal value and not as objects or secondary, to treat them in a way. I have to learn this now. Mm-hmm. And I have to hold myself accountable to people other than myself who are not sexist. Mm-hmm. That's a different thing. And I come to the table with that. I don't get to sit on that, because if I sit on it, what happens? It's still there. Normally, the things that we do are simply outlets for what's still there. That's it. It's just an outlet, but it's still there. It's in there. You haven't addressed it. And anything that you do is an outgrowth of whatever's going on in there. The Bible says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. That's just facts, right? You do what is going on the inside, period. Whether you intend it or not, it's in there. Mm-hmm. So if I suddenly get baptized and say, oh, I'll never do this again, well, that's a lie. I'm sitting on it. Now I'm creating pressure. I'm creating internal, physical, emotional, spiritual, and intellectual pressure that I may not even be aware of until I'm put in a situation and I suddenly explode on everybody and I have no idea what the heck just happened. He's acting so out of character. No, he's not. He's perfectly in character.
You don't say things in anger that you don't mean.
He's perfectly in character. He just ain't done it in a while. That's exactly who he is. You see, and the problem is let me bring it down. The challenge that I have had and that I have seen others have in the church is that we're not honest with ourselves about who we are. Let me be clear to everybody. Who you are, oh, help me, Holy Ghost. Who you are does not discount whose you are.
Yep.
Peter belonged to the Lord, and that dude was racist. He was the Lord's. And he baptized thousands of people in the first 6 chapters of Acts. But by the time he meets Paul, which is 14 years later, he meets Paul in Samaria. He's hanging out with the Gentiles until the brothers show up from Jerusalem. And now he's going to go eat at the brown table. It's just, he had a problem, but he still was the Lord's. But when he was put in an untoward situation, he erupted on the scene because he hadn't addressed it. He had had revelation on top of the building. He had the revelation, but he didn't know how to integrate it into his life. And so a lot of us, I'm on another thing. A lot of people have got ministers. I'm gonna talk to ministers for about 5 seconds. Ministers have a problem because we are privileged to operate in the world of revelation, and you think revelation equals transformation, and it don't. You will have no transformation without practical integration.
Where's my organ and tambourine? I need to be a tambourine. I need to tap my feet, Holy Ghost dance.
The word. No, I mean, I think that's such a critical point for people to understand. You can have the right idea, you can tell the right thing, and you can be completely untransformed by knowing the right thing. Just because you know it does not mean you know how to work it out for your own self. It has no bearing on how you actually live your life. And that's part of church hurt that has been, I think, one of the most painful, because then you really do get into an area where somebody's preaching this and living that. And that preaching and living, and I think Shireen mentioned it earlier, that it leads to this cognitive dissonance that happens where it's like, how is it possible that this person could be preaching such great sermons and yet still be doing XYZ? This is not possible. Cannot happen. Can be impossible. And it's like, well, that doesn't mean they've been transformed just because you know the words to say. It's like being able to sing in tune to a song. Doesn't mean that I know anything about that musical genre or anything about living that life. I mean, nothing. I could sing reggae till I'm blue. That don't make me Jamaican. Right? It just doesn't make you something because you know how to do it. You had to integrate it and to let it transform your life is something completely different. And that, I think, speaks to Shireen's point about the cognitive dissonance.
Listen, I'm going to say something, and I just need you to hear me on this.
Okay.
Paul says in, I believe it's Romans 8. He talks about, if you therefore put by the Spirit, put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. The problem that we have is that we keep trying to put to death the deeds of the body, the thinking of the body, with the body. When it is in the Spirit, it is through the Spirit, this new life. And again, it's the functionality of accountability, but here's the deal: the humility that is necessary, the authenticity that is necessary, the vulnerability that is necessary happens in the Spirit. It is a spiritual thing. It is a functionary thing second. It is an application thing. How do I know? So in Romans 8, it says, our spirit agrees with the Spirit of God that we are children of God. That's Romans 8. Paul says, I am not present with you to condemn this man. I'm paraphrasing, but our spirits are joined by the power of the Lord Jesus Christ, is what he said. There is an agreement that takes place in the Spirit, a new life that is gained, an access to the divine that says, guess what? In the presence of God, I am going to be fully authentic. God, I am this. God, I know who you are. Thank you for that revelation, but please let me remember who I am. And when I step into that space in it within me, and I'm willing to own that thing and to appreciate that salvation is of that guy, The guy that is saved is not the guy that is perfect, but the guy that is flawed and fallen.
Mm-hmm.
When I embrace that within myself, when I stop demonizing myself, when I, this is how I'm feeling today, Lord, and I want to act out in this way, and I don't have the self strength to maintain whatever I need to maintain.
Mm-hmm.
I need help. Then all of a sudden, in the spirit, God says, Tabitha, Storm, call Jason.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have an opportunity to vocalize the authenticity and the vulnerability to those that are joined with me in the spirit. But we don't have that background conversation to create the healthy growth soil that we need for the things that we're going for. We don't have it. I have a ridiculous expectation of myself. I have an unreasonable expectation of the Lord, and I have a retarded expectation of everybody else. I actually think that God, by virtue of revelation or high church celebration, is going to mystically and magically change me in the moment of tears and ecstasy, that I will never make a mistake again, and I will never need to have this conversation.
Right. So I just want to interject. The questions just come to my mind as I've been listening to you talk. One of the things that you seem to be highlighting in church hurt and is honesty and vulnerability. My question to you then would be the lack of the absence of space within the Christian church for that honesty, transparency, and vulnerability. Would you say this is linked in some ways to it being male dominated for centuries and the idea that masculinity is not these concepts?
Yes. I believe, let me say it that way. Make sure the masculinity that we see of Jesus is not highlighted when we think of the heroes of Scripture. The masculinity that we highlight in Scripture, the heroes that we lift up, are the Abrahams and the Davids and the Samsons and the Gideons and these men for whom, starting in Genesis and hunter-gatherer and agrarian cultures, right, post-fall, are predominantly driven in either conquering or protecting. This is facts. And everything else is assumed to be a woman's issue. Right? So here comes Jesus, who doesn't fit any narrative. He doesn't fit any masculine narrative whatsoever that we have. He's flipping tables, but he's crying with the old lady and touching her dead son. He's letting some woman wash his feet, right? Who's a known promiscuous woman, and he's not trying to hit on her. He doesn't fit the stereotypical role of Western understood masculinity. He's not fitting it. He's not trying to dominate anybody. His entire methodology of leadership and world focus turns Maslow's hierarchy on its head. You see what I'm saying? So let me just wrap this up this way. Wrap it up this way. When I look at Jesus for who he is, not only, if I look at his deity, so be it, but I must look at his deity in terms of its condescension. Don't have a lofty conversation with me about the grandeur of God in the existential spheres of whatever, and not talk to me about the very, very human being that embraced lepers, that didn't try to overthrow a government. Don't talk to me. Don't talk to me about the man who was willing. Oh, this is not going to be comfortable to say. Who was willing to liberate his people in a non-political way, to start a kingdom within an empire that will be more moral while less powerful.
Mm.
Like, that is the model of manhood that we have.
But not the one that is used in leadership for
Not at all.
centuries in
Not
the
at all.
Christian church.
Not at all.
Right.
Centuries, that has been secondary. It's been hidden. It's been non-seen. It's been almost ignored, that style of leadership, because what has been praised, lauded, and continue to go on is this idea of a lack of honesty, not having that transparency, not having it's also almost created an environment in which, because we've craved the power that came, we then wanted to retain power as a wide now organization. Then you have this challenge once you're retaining power. If that becomes your goal, then transparency goes, honesty goes, everything goes, because the cost is we will stay powerful at all costs. And that then leads to an environment in which men who have been conditioned and socialized into an idea that their emotions are invalid, their emotions are not recognized, their humanity is often not recognized, they are only there for their power, their strength, etc., their ability to provide a environment, then come into power and stay in power, because all we're concerned about then is the system of power and not the people and not the existence of the kingdom of God.
Right. And I would just add to that, I think that the lack of honesty begins in how we tell the stories of the people that Jason named that we hold up, because we are dishonest in their storytelling. We hold them up as heroes when actually they may have done some heroic things, but they were actually very often horrific people. Right. And so I think the dishonesty starts in how we tell these stories surrounding that. And, Jason made the statement that they were either conquering or protecting the people that we hold up. And so that leads me to question what that does to the mindset of the church, where the heroes that we hold up are always in conflict. And if those that we hold up as heroes are always in conflict, how then do we prepare and equip the church for resolution?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Agreed.
our heroes are all in conflict.
Agreed. Additionally, and this is and to that point, oftentimes because I get excited. Y'all know me. I get excited, and I'm not trying to get excited. But we when we tell the story of God in the Bible, we often tell it through the lens of power. God's narrative is told through the lens of power. Right? Power of the dunamis, the exousia, the stuff that stuff is made from. I will level mountains and I will explode volcanoes and plague upon your people and hailstones and have some rats and Red Sea part, the power, or the power to be everywhere at once. Or the power to know everything. So we have this narrative of God, and you can see it in the scripture. They had the narrative of God, and they wrote it that way, of a God of power. Okay, that is the primary emphasis. If you look at it, God's trying to come through and reveal other things like he does in Ezekiel, in Exodus 33, I believe, or 34, the Lord God, gracious and merciful, blah, blah, blah. He declares who he is. The last thing he says is that he's powerful.
Mm.
But when they tell the story of God, they always highlight some element of his power.
Mm.
And I want to submit that we have, for thousands of years, mischaracterized the very fundament of God's nature. The very fundament of God's nature. And I think there's a book out there by a guy named John Peckham. You may want to get it, A Theodicy of Love. I know I agree with him, and I haven't even, because I've heard him talk. Right? I've heard him speak. I agree with him. I just haven't read everything. Man is like a machine. He puts books out. It's ridiculous. Right? But understand, Jesus comes to reveal, Hebrews says, Jesus is the expressed character of God. That's what it says. Let me back up. If we're all very interested in power, then the way that the church has happened over the last 2,000 years makes perfect sense, because the way we've told the Bible narrative is based on a God of power.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But when you see Jesus and you observe his engagement, he's not power. He's a loving man, son of God, who has power. There's a difference. The core of his expression is not power.
Mm.
The core of his expression is love. And the challenge is that when you make power the center, you have no means for reconciliation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
According to the Bible, in 1 John, and I believe it's 1 John. One of the first somewhere, I don't remember which passage, but it says, God is love. So let's look at what that is. Love, the word that is used in the text, is agape.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are a bunch of different loves in the Greek, but that's one they used. It is a kind of almost a universal, sacrificial, other-centered love. Understand what is happening. The isness of God is declared to be love.
Mm.
God is love. And so if God's isness is love, then God must be love without any creature involved. Which means God was love before God created. God was love and God was loving. And therefore, if God is loving, then there must be another person or being or entity, something to receive the love. So if God is love, then God by default is relational, fundamentally within the isness of God. God's being is inherently relational. If God's being is inherently relational before he creates anything, then God's being must be naturally plural by default. Because you cannot be agape. You cannot be agape. Understand that God did not become love when he created. He was love before he made. You cannot be agape unless you are agape another. By default, then, if God is plural, God is free. God, within God's godness, God is free to give or to withhold, to receive or to reject. It is from that core, the fuel, the nuclear core of God's being is love. And therefore, from this premise, God deploys his love in three ways: knowledge, presence, and power. All are fueled by love.
Mm-hmm.
All of them. They work on behalf of love. They come from love, for love, by love, with love. It's all love. Period. Therefore, when God creates humans, humans are made from love, with love, for love, by love, in love, through love.
Mm-hmm.
For the purpose of loving.
Mm-hmm.
When we bring it back, by definition, love is vulnerable. By default, by practical application, love is vulnerable. Love is honest. Love is authentic. Power does not need to be. Power just needs to be powerful. Power can be deceptive. Power can be abusive. Love is gentle. That's not me. That's Paul now. Love is gentle. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not seek itself, does not envy, does not vaunt. That's what the text says. So then, if we have an organization, listen to this, that is driven, fueled by love, by default, we must have an authentic, accountable, open, transparent, right? Humble organization. It will be forgiving. Of course it will be. It will be patient. Absolutely. But you cannot be patient and kind at the expense of authentic and transparent. You will have all of them.
Right.
You will have all of them. And you will do whatever you need to do to restore the oppressed and to lovingly correct the oppressor. When you are driven and fueled at the core by love.
Right. Now, I'm mindful of the time.
I'm glad you are, because I'm not.
Okay.
Well, yeah, what I did was you came on half an hour late, so I've just allowed for the hour's conversation that we're having. So I was mindful that I was like, okay, we do an hour 15 with our guests. Cool. We're still somewhere on track.
I think this might be a bit longer. Well, I just want, but I was going to say I'm mindful of the time, but actually Jason's teaching, that's the word I'm going for. Jason's teaching on love. See, that's the doctor in him.
You can see these two are brothers, right? If you don't know. This is how brothers behave.
It's a nice segue into my next question. But before I ask my question, I don't know if you want to deal with the comments
I can just add up these two comments. So on an earlier point that we were talking about, Shireen just added that she was watching the Pastors Roundtable and they were talking about the importance of conference ministerial directors and a safe space for pastors to share. So I think this goes to the point of how we have processes to hold people accountable. And so here is a denominational challenge. So the denomination within which Shireen is talking about has this built-in space that is supposed to be for safety of pastors, and they can speak to the ministerial director and they can do these things. Here comes the challenge and the systemic issue. The systemic issue is that this person is voted in by the membership. They would like to retain their term, and then they returned. If they do not keep their term in office, they return to being a colleague with all the information that they hold on the pastors. They just return to the field with all of that knowledge within their system. And so it's led to a almost toxic environment in which the ministerial director should be a safe space. But because it's a voted position, because there is a power element to it, because there is a positional element to it, it can and has been in a lot of instances across the globe historically not created a safe space for pastors to exist, because you know that this person may or may not be trustworthy in that role. They're not necessarily qualified to be ministerial director. They are voted into a position. They may or may not be a colleague that you get on with or did not get on with before. They may come back to the field with all the personal knowledge about your situation. And in the spirit of it not being a honest and open and trustworthy, accountable space, this leads to some challenges, to put that mildly. I don't know if Jason wants to say that any differently, but that's
I think that and it's just I believe that the actions many years ago of Myron Edmonds immediately diffuse all of that.
Okay. I don't know what happened.
We keep waiting for somebody to be a safe space for us. Mm-hmm. Just be safe. This is what I mean. That's what I mean. If I keep waiting for a safe space for me to let the air out of my balloon, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. I may never find that person. Mm-hmm. Myron Emmons, many years ago, when he was in Tennessee, just stood up. I'm not going to say what he said, but he just stood up because I know the story, but I'm not going to say his business. Stood up in front of his church and said, y'all, this is the truth. In front of his whole people, and started a movement of authenticity at his church.
Mm-hmm.
If you tell your story on your terms, nobody can do anything to you. You tell your story on your terms. At the end, because at the end of the day, I would rather my story come out on my terms than the story come out on somebody else's terms. It's one. Two, we keep assuming that, no, let me not say that's not what I'm going to say. People don't do that because they're afraid for their livelihood. However, there have been many people who have said, this is what it is, and this is where I'm going to get some help, and I need accountability, and let's move forward. There are many people that have actually flourished in ministry, being authentic. Being authentic. What's her name? A good illustration, anecdotal, non-Adventist, is Perry Hill, Jackie Hill Perry. Again, the woman came out in ministry, told everybody, wrote a book about her past, everything. She speaks from the position of where she came from, what God has delivered and is keeping her delivered from. She has 4 kids with her husband. And she still is quite honest about where she is in the struggle. She tells the story on her terms. And God has honored the authenticity and the transparency. But we keep trying to hide this thing in the name of job security, and it's not only toxic to us, it's not creating healing at all in the community. Because imagine the power. Storm, I'm gonna shut up right now. Imagine the power of any church where the pastor says, "This has been my struggle. This is what I'm recovering from, and I need y'all to hold me accountable on this point." All of a sudden, everybody's like, "Yo, I have this struggle." Everyone's going to say it now. Everyone's going to suddenly come out. This is what it is.
So, just on what you said, it's an interesting point that you talk about the openness and authenticity, and how it encourages that. And then I would just, before I move on to the question that I wanted to ask, just a quick question. How much harm then does the insistence of the church, and I mean all denominations, on gagging clauses in cases where they have done wrong, harm not just the church, but the individual, because it denies them the ability to tell the story on their terms?
So, yes, one, agreed. And here's the problem. Okay. When the church stopped being an authentic community, it became a legal one. And the moment you make that transition, the ability, because remember, the kingdom, Lord, I'm not trying to preach today. The kingdom in Acts, adjudicated by God themselves. When you did dirt in the kingdom, the adjudication was divine. There was no question. Period. And because of the interdependence of the people within the kingdom, it made economic sense. It was economic sense to operate with integrity within the kingdom, because the kingdom is the way that the poor survived. Interconnected. If you got kicked out of the kingdom, you're back out there on your own. You don't want that, because you know what that is. Here they treat you with respect and kindness and compassion. In the kingdom, your needs are met. You don't want to be kicked out, back out into that rat race. And when dirt happened in the kingdom, immediate adjudication by God. Perfect illustration, Ananias and Sapphira. God did not play with that. Not at all.
Which I think...
No, when we stepped away from that kingdom community, we took adjudication to Caesar. Now, it's one thing if I'm dealing with non-kingdom people, we talk to Caesar. But when I'm talking to kingdom people, we deal with God. And the problem is, we're so used to dealing with Caesar that you really don't see. We've brought that in the house now. And the harm is done, because now you got to gag members in a place where truth is supposed to be told. Truth is supposed to be the thing the church is fueled on. Truth. But now I can't tell the truth.
Can I just take that one step further? Because I just want to take this one step further to say this. And I really want our listeners and viewers to really understand this point. I think that to take it one step further is to say this. There are some actions, some criminal actions that people undertake. We've talked about them in the beginning: molestation, abuse, financial corruption, all of these types of criminal actions that people undertake that require us legally to go to Caesar, right? So
Agreed. I agree.
So, but I'm going to take this one step.
Yeah.
If you were a truth organization, it is truth coming to Caesar. Therefore, the gagging orders are not necessary. Therefore, you are bringing the ethics of God into the room when you are dealing with the people. The problem is that you are taking into Caesar is not God, it's power. We are the organization, we hold the power, and therefore we're coming into this situation as powerful people to make sure that the victim understands the limitations under the law. And we guise it by saying, this is just a normal part of the legal framework. We've handed it over to the lawyers. This is what they want us to do. But if you are actually honest, authentic, truthful, when criminal actions, when actions that you cannot resolve in your local church situation, whatever those criminal actions are, require you to go outside to get the restitution, to get the actual judgment and justice that is deserved to the victim, you would be honest, you would be authentic, and you would be given, you would bring such a high ethical position that it would transform the way that legal processes work for the betterment of victims.
There you go.
And what happens currently is that we go in as church people and we behave so badly because we are consumed with power that the transformational element no longer happens, because what was supposed to happen under Israel is that other nations would see how well the people were doing and say, hey, do we need to operate and understand some legal and adjust some of our frameworks so that our people can flourish like their people are flourishing? Exactly. They were always meant to be an example. You were always meant to take God from where you are into the situation, and then it becomes a transformational element. Whereas currently what we do, if we're dealing with church hurt, is that when somebody has done something that crosses that border, we're no longer talking about, interpersonal relationship struggles which happen all the time, but you've crossed that border into an element of criminal action, of abuse, of whatever it is, and it requires you to take legal steps. It requires the victim to take legal steps. The church comes in not in a position of truth, honesty, transparency, God loving at the center. They come in from a position of power and employ the same tactics, if not worse in a lot of cases, than what you find elsewhere. And no longer are we the influence for good in the world. No longer are we transformational in those spaces. What we tend to be is actually counterproductive to the good news, the gospel, and Jesus's message, because we behave so badly that the response of judges, the response of the opposition, the response of people who are related to the victim is that that cannot be. If that is what God is about, I don't want nothing to do with it, because we have put into the world the power, protection of power message before we've put in a protection of love, before we've put in love, truth, honesty at its core into that message. And thereby, that is where we get in. So that's where I would just push you just a step further to say, there are times when we need to go in, but we need to go in from a position of love, truth, and honesty. This is what we did, sir, your honor. So we don't require them to sign a gagging order because we believe it's their ethical duty to be able to tell their truth. Yes. We believe it's our moral duty to allow them the space to be free, because if they aren't free, they aren't healed. If they aren't free, they're going to be in counseling the rest of their life. Exactly. We don't want that for them, thereby hold us to the standard. And because we don't go in like that, we end up with sometimes harsher judgments because we are just consumed with power and hiding behind the idea that we don't want to lose face, or this is the other person is, and making up stories, going the extra mile, doing the damage to people in the name of God. But really, it is all about keeping power as a church. For me, that's the push forward.
Which double injures, because we end up using God to justify silencing truth.
Yeah. Well, it's great. It comes back to my question, which now will then be, how do we heal church hurt? Because I think this is a question that I really want to get to. How do we heal church hurt? And also, I would probably, I don't know, it's maybe a sub question, but how do we heal church hurt when we belong to a church? And it doesn't matter what your denomination is. Every denomination has this concept that they have the truth. Mm-hmm. How do you manage to then heal church hurt where actually you need to come out of that environment for your own healing and protection? But to do so would create so much cognitive dissonance, because the denominations have taught that they have the truth. And I would just go on to add to that my personal belief is that no denomination has the truth, and every denomination has the truth. And by that, I mean, Jesus says he is the truth. Therefore, every denomination has the truth, and every denomination has a truth. But the way that it has been taught is that the denomination is the truth. How then do you foster healing in which someone needs to step out of a truth when they have been taught that to step back is to leave the truth?
Okay, so it's a very thorough question. Like, put that in the chat so that I can see the question, because it's a layered question. So I see Daniel's question, and I think that's a very good question. I think the answer is yes. Church hurt does happen when power is prioritized over love. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And when institutions are prioritized over individuals. So let's just add to that. So I will use myself as an illustration, right? Of the way that I have and am doing it, right? Not the way, but a way. Okay. Once I realized that I actually had church hurt, took me a minute to realize that I had church hurt, right? I think I was on a journey, and I need people to understand that it's okay to journey. You'll go on a journey, Pain often takes us on a journey. And that's just facts. And so my journey took me on a study, because that's the way I'm built. I'm built to study. So I began to study. I studied everything. I studied latitudinally ancient religions, laterally. I studied religion, ancient religions. I said, why Jews? Of all the other ancient religions, why Jews? Okay, I got Jews. Understood. I respect what everybody else was trying to do, because I didn't come to the position that the Jews were the only people that knew God. I understood up front from the Bible that multiple peoples knew God. I'll be anecdotal, but let me be anecdotal and build the case, if that's all right, Storm. If you believe the Bible, then you believe that everybody descends from Ararat, from Babel. You believe that, which means everybody at some point in time had a knowledge of God. If it went sideways a little bit, that's fine. But what we see in the Old Testament is that God is attempting to create a people who will be an example of the corrective. Okay? I'm going to give you a living example of what it should look like, and everybody else look over here. That's what it was supposed to be, right? So you have a good anecdotal illustrations. Abimelech and Abraham. Abraham pimps his wife out twice. Abimelech takes his wife one time, and God says, Abimelech, you're dead. And Abimelech's like, God, I didn't know. Well, who's Abimelech talking to? He's talking to God. Well, how does Abimelech, the Philistine, know God? If the only people that knew God were Abraham and his people. Additionally, Melchizedek was not a Jew or a Hebrew. He was an Amorite. But he was priest king, right? Additionally, again, based on Bible study, Job was a priest king that had a kingdom. But how did he know God if only Abraham and his people knew God? We could follow the Bible. The first two chapters of Amos are very, very instructive on multiple nations who are judged by the same God, that they all probably called a different name, and they're all judged based on different stuff. But it's the same God. People knew God. The Jews just knew him in a very specific way, as designed to be a corrective. Once I understood that, I'm like, okay, I understand the corrective. Got it. Okay. Why Jews? Why Jesus? Next question. Why Jesus? Looked at the text, came to an understanding of Jesus. Thank you very much. Why Christianity? Got it. Then I had to look at my denomination. Why my denomination? And I looked at all of them, as many as I could get my hands on. Right? I even looked at Freemasonry at one point in time. I went down that rabbit hole for a while. Rosicrucianism, Bilderbergers, the Bohemian Garden, the whole nine. Looked at it all. Why Christianity? Narrowed down, why am I an Adventist? Am I an Adventist culturally, or am I an Adventist principally? And so for a lot of people, they are cultural to whatever their denomination is. It is a cultural family thing. It's what we do. It's not that you thought about it and you've reflected on it and you've studied it to understand why that is the case. From a principle level, it's not that you appreciate the various journeys of other people. It's that this is what you were taught, and this is right because you were taught it. You're cultural. That's it. And you have not studied, and you have no experience other than probably 50 miles within the radius of your house. That's it. You haven't traveled probably outside of 2 states around your house. You're a cultural whatever you are. For me, that is not the case. So I studied all of those things. I just narrowed my focus. Okay, I understand why I am principally an Adventist. But let me say this. I am principally an Adventist as it relates to someone looking for Jesus. I'm looking for the second coming. So I look at the doctrines from the point of Jesus. This was my process. I had to get this in my head. This is why I still am in. I can take the title. Got it. Put that intellect aside. I put that aside for a while. And then I went to counseling. I had to talk about the abuse that I suffered and the breakup of my family's my family at a very early age, and the domestic abuse my mother suffered elsewhere. I had to talk about all of these things and the struggles that my family has had. And I had to deal with that. And I asked myself the question, where is God? I was pissed off at him. I had to just accept the fact that I was mad at God. Like, I don't feel like calling you my father today. Like, this happened to me. How can your name be holy?
Mm.
I had to embrace that fact.
Mm.
Okay, I get Jesus. Where were you when this happened?
Mm.
I'm not afraid to ask God that question. I have a whole book of the Bible that deals with it. It's called Lamentations, book of weeping, book of crying is what it is. And in it, he basically says, you did this to me, God. You broke my teeth with gravel. You did this. You did that. You did that. That's what he says in Lamentations. Go read it.
Mm.
The grief book of the Bible. God, you did this. I went through that stage. I did. Right. And as I, after the grief cycle, because in any grief cycle, this is the grief cycle: shock and denial. Then you have anger. Then you have bargaining. Then you have depression. Then you have acceptance. And after you get to this, you have meaning making. It's the sixth one. They just came out with it a couple years ago, right? Meaning making. And that's when I began to reflect on, okay, do I think that God actually did this to me? No, this person did it to me. Because what I know about God, when I look back at my life, and I had to be taught. So let's be very clear, friends. When I had a survival mentality and all I saw was the things I survived, I could not see God. I saw my trauma. And that's normal. So I needed help to see that I actually was doing okay. I needed somebody else's eyes on my story. I needed a community, counseling, recovery, therapists, everybody, friends. I needed that. This has been my journey. These are different things that I did, right? I went through all of this, all of these different things. And one of my counselors when I first met her at Andrews, I told her my whole story. She got up, went to the bathroom, and cried. It was just too much for her in one day, and I was very flat about it. After one semester, she says, Jason, you do realize that you're not there, though. She says, you're telling the story like you're in the present moment of the event and of the trauma of your childhood and of your parentage and blah, 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 but you're not there, you're here. She says, you've already beat the odds for you to be here. It stunned me to hear that. I was like, oh, but I needed somebody to help me see it. What didn't I do? What did I have to learn to stop doing? And this is something that's happened recently. I have had to learn to stop expecting the church to live up to what it claims, because it cannot. The claims are deified claims, but the people are not deified people. So I had to change my expectation. I walk into a room, what do I expect? Broken people. I don't know how you're going to hurt me, but you're going to do it. I'm not saying you're a bad person. I'm saying it's going to happen. It's inevitable. I might hurt your feelings. I don't do it on purpose. You're a human. But what I had to start doing recently, literally within the last 10 years, I had to start forgiving. And forgiveness is literally, I owe you, Storm. You choose to not expect me to pay it. That is forgiveness. Doesn't mean that we're friends. That's forgiveness. When you stop expecting me to pay it back, when you actually tell me I don't want you to pay it back because you can't, that's forgiveness. And what we find in the Bible is that God does one up on forgiveness. I owe him, and he says, try and pay me back because you can't. Watch this. I'll pay myself back on your behalf. So I've had to start asking myself the question, how do I pay myself back for the hurt that I've experienced? What are the things that I am doing to pay me back? I'm not expecting them to pay. I don't want them to pay. Because if I keep waiting on them to pay, they'll never pay. It'll never be enough. I'm 48 years old. How is the person or the church or the institution or whatever that hurt my family going to pay me back for 48 years of my life and 60 some of my mother's? You don't have enough to pay me back. I will pay me back. That doesn't mean that we're friends. Doesn't mean that I like you. It means I don't expect from you. My life is not held hostage based on the expectation that you will somehow do right by me for the injury and its continuous effects. I will pay me back. You are free to go. That has changed my life because I've had to look now at my own behaviors. I've had to look at my own behaviors and say, does this behavior pay me back, or does this behavior perpetuate my pain? Does this response pay me back, or does this response perpetuate my pain? Am I building on the pain that they gave me, or am I healing myself? Am I restoring myself? Do I believe that God has gifted me with the Holy Ghost so that he can renew my body? That is in they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. He will renew my body. Psalms 23, he will restore my soul, which is my mind, will, and my emotions. And then in Isaiah, it says that the Lord waits upon the humble to revive the spirit of the humble. So he will revive my spirit, restore my soul, and he will renew my body. Am I waiting on a fallen human to do that? Am I willing to take God by his word and let those things happen in my life in my own time? Right here and now. I don't need you. I don't need you for this. You cannot heal the thing that you injured. Please stop.
It's interesting that the Isaiah quote that you mentioned, that God will, what was it? God will heal something of the humble.
Revive the spirit.
He will revive the spirit of the humble. And I think humble is a interesting quality. And in that, to be humble is to have a low estimation of your self-importance. And so therefore, it's saying, I am not important enough that these people owe me. I am not important enough that the institution will recognize the hurt done to me, but that God will revive me when I recognize that.
That I'm important to him.
To him, yes.
We have deified the institution. No.
Yeah.
They cannot revive my spirit. I don't care how many millions of dollars. If I have a broken spirit, the text says I will rot my bones. You can't throw money at that. If my mind is fractured, you can't throw money at that.
Yeah. So as for me, it was just the recognition that I'm not important enough to the church, to the institution, that they will do right by me, but rather that once I recognize that, I will seek that righteousness and rightness from God.
And equally, let me say this. Church hurt is about the spirit. Now, unfortunately, Adventists don't have a theology of the human spirit because we're too busy trying to say that there's no such thing as a consciousness apart from the body. But the Bible says we have a spirit. It doesn't say we have a consciousness separate from the body, but we have a spirit, which means church hurt is a spiritual wound. Not only may it be physical, not only is it soulish in the mind, will, and the emotions, but it is a spirit wound. Why would I go to a fallen institution to have my spirit healed?
Right. So I guess that then touches upon the question of how do we promote that healing when people have been taught that their denomination holds the truth and it's the sole holder of that truth? How do we get people to the point of healing from church hurt, because you bring up the point that it's a spiritual hurt that people are dealing with, but the spiritual hurt manifests itself typically in two ways, and that is that people remain silent and in the toxic environment that hurts them, so they are denied the healing, or that they walk away from God and the concept of God altogether. But that in itself still denies them healing, because walking away from it is to deny the spiritual hurt that you have experienced. So how do we get people to that point of healing and understanding, actually, I need to step away and can still hold the truth. I just may not longer have a truth that I had previously.
Yes. So I'm not gonna say how do we get people. I can't do people. Right. I just can't. That's too big for me. What I try to do is to be a safe person. If I believe if we had more individuals who were willing to be safe people, safe in terms of a place of protection, and safe in terms of a place where you put your most precious stuff. When you put it in there, it's locked. The only person that knows the key or the code to that safe is the person that owns the safe. I think that if we were willing to, if I am willing, I have always been, no, that's not true. But recently, more, within the last 10 to 15 years, I have attempted to be the safe person. Why? Because this is the thing about it. Spirituality, of which safety, authenticity, transparency, humility, all those T's that we talk about, right? Vulnerability, all those things are spiritual qualities. They are relational qualities. Those are caught by experience. They cannot be taught by instruction. Which means by definition, by default, I have to be a place where connection is possible. I have to be a place where power is not the goal. I have to be that soft place, right? Where John laid his head on the table at the table when they were having the Passover. I've got to be the place where John can lay his head, because John had an abusive mother. It's very strange, but Thunder was his mother's name. That's why they were in the boat with Dad. Thunder was the mom. He had a very. So Jesus was his safe space. And he had a temper. I'm called down fire and destroy everybody. He's like, John, chill out, man. Just relax. It's all right. We don't need to do all that. But Jesus was John's safe space. And I think that if we had more individuals who were secure in whose they are and honest in who they are, then they would be able to say, listen, you're safe with me. You want to go over to that church over there right now? Go right ahead. Call me. Tell me how it is. You're going on a journey. You're going to see the shaman to take some psychedelic. Okay. Hey, come back and tell me how that was. I'm not encouraging you. I'm not telling you that you need to go do that. I'm saying that's what you said you're going to do. Okay. I understand. You're on a journey. All right. I'm here. Because today we know fundamentally that the linchpin of all philosophy and theology, the linchpin of all philosophy and theology that can be documented to date, the one thing around which it all revolves, all the different religions, etc., is love. That is the linchpin. And when you talk to all these other different philosophers, you can talk to Wiccan, it don't matter. Unless somebody's a straight up Satanist and they actually hate Jesus, everybody likes Jesus. They just may not like Christians.
Well, there is that.
They may not like Christians. So at some point, somebody could be going to study Dahomey Voodoo. It's still going to bring them back to Jesus. Because you cannot escape him. The way he lived his life, the way he treated people is the ultimate example. It's the ultimate example of what it is to be a person fueled by love. If we had more people who were willing to know whose they are and who they are and bring that whole thing to Jesus, they could be safe, but you'd be surprised who would be in your circle. That has all kind of hurt, but you're the safe space. You'd be surprised because you're the safe space. Why? Because you have found safety with God, and your vulnerability and honesty and accountability means you're safe for yourself. And if you have found safety with God and you are safe for yourself, then you are safe for other people. You're safe. And before you know it, now people come. Now you've become a pillar for somebody, a pillar of safety. Because they know, you know what? I know what Jason struggles with. And you know what? I know that I'm safe with Jason. Why? Because Jason is safe with himself and Jason is safe with God. So even though Jason struggles with A and I might be B, if Jason wasn't safe with God and with himself, then me being B would be challenging in the presence of Jason, who is A. But my B-ness is safe with Jason's A-ness because Jason is safe with God and safe with himself. And the challenge is we keep waiting on the institution to be safe. I don't expect it to be safe. It cannot be safe. It's not possible. It's not possible. But what we can have is safe people who know whose they are, who know who they are. They draw their safety and security from God, and they are safe with themselves.
Okay. I can I can see a lot of people struggling with that answer. I think it's a good answer, but I see a lot of people struggling with it, and yet it is still built in many ways on the principle the principles that God used when He chose the children of Israel. You be the safe space, and everyone else will deal with it from seeing you're the safe space. So it makes sense to me in a theological framework. But one of the things that I heard you say when you were talking and dealing with church hurt and your process of dealing with it, you're very specific to talk. You're very careful to talk specifically about your own process. Is that the ability to question what you know and believe was critical to that process of you healing from church hurt. I guess for me, when I was looking at this and I was looking at stories of church hurt, there were two responses, and they were denial or throw the baby out with the bathwater. It was hard for people to question their beliefs.
Yeah.
Either my beliefs are valid, in which case I stay in the toxic environment, or they're invalid. They struggle to come to a position of, well, actually both can be true at the same time. How did you manage that process?
So And this is where I think chaplaincy helped me. But knowing that and having people that would tell me you're grieving. One of the things that I have experienced in the church is that we don't give people permission to grieve. We don't give them permission to actually go through the grief process, which can take however long it takes. We don't give them permission to it. We want them to jump to acceptance immediately. Well, no, that's not how it works. People get angry. Because let me tell you what grief is. Grief is love with no place to go. And when people get hurt by the church, they are hurt because they love the church. And now that love has been betrayed and they have no place to go. They have no place to put it. So they're in shock and denial. Then they're pissed. Then they start bargaining. Well, maybe if I should have, and they normally cannibalize themselves. Why didn't I see it coming? I should have known better. Maybe if I'd had enough faith. All that shenanery. Right? Then they get depressed. But we don't let people go through this process because we are afraid of the anger and depression. We don't want it. And it's because as an institution, we don't like being held accountable. It's because we have to be right. For me, grieving was part of it. So that's one. Two, once I understood that grief is love, I had to ask myself the question, what is it or who is it that I love? Do I love the church? Or do I love the Lord? And I could love both, or I could love either or. But if I love the church and I can't say that I love the Lord, or if I assume that the Lord and the church are synonymous, I had a problem. And so for me, I was like, I love the Lord. I grew up in the church. I understand it. I get it. And I also understand it's full of defunct and dysfunctional people. Do I love the church? Yeah, no. Not really. I mean, I don't love institutions. I'm not an institutionalist. I love people. I love people in the church. I love the Lord. But that's kind of one of the ways that I had to deal with it. It's like, well, what do I do? Like, do I just up and leave? Well, I did. I left for a while. I did my own thing. So what? Like, I did it. To act like you're not going to go do your thing is problematic. It's a lie. Because if you don't do it out there, you're going to do it in the church. And if you don't do it in the church, you're going to do it in yourself. But somebody's going to get hurt somewhere. And we assume that the lie is that this is a lie. If you're not a part of the denomination, you're not a part of the Lord. Now that's untrue. That's not true. That's flatly not true. They can say whatever they want. It's entirely not true. Ellen White has a quote. Let me just quote for the whiteheads, right? For all the whiteheads. That sounds like a pimple. They probably need to Let me just go ahead and say this. Ellen White has a quote where she says, until it is forced by law, Sunday is not the mark of the beast. Which means there's a whole bunch of Sunday people out there that belong to the Lord and don't belong to the beast. So what are you talking about? You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
David himself says, where can I go and escape your presence? If I believe David, who is a murderous adulterer, if I believe David, who's a polygamist, and Deuteronomy says the king should not be a polygamist. If I believe David, who is murderous and wanted to kill Nabal. If I believe David, and he says, where can I go and escape your presence? If I ascend into heaven, you are there. If I lay down if I live in hell, you are there. Which means there literally is nowhere that a person can go and God not be present. So what are we telling people?
Yeah.
It's a whole sermon in itself. I think that's a whole separate subject.
It Sorry, go on.
No, go on. You were started talking first.
No, I was going to say that's a good and power. It's a statement by Jason, because especially within a Adventist context, you know, you're told, hey, God's presence, heavenly angels don't go into nightclubs, they don't go into these places, and they don't do this and they don't do that. But actually, as you point out, David's saying something completely different. And you know, you're often taught that if you walk away from the church, you're walking away from the presence of God. And that is, you know, at the core of the question that I'm trying to get to. You know, people that have been taught this, the struggle, the pressure, the fear. I think fear is perhaps an apt word to use here, of saying, I need to step away from this institution, but if I do so, I've been told and taught that I'm stepping away from the presence of God, and the abuse that has created, does create, for me is, you know, a real tangible danger, which is one of my overwhelming concerns for people that are trying to deal with church hurt, the safety and security that they can feel in stepping away from what they have been taught, with the knowledge that they're never stepping away from God.
Okay, because so yeah, I'm glad you clarified, because I was like, wait, when I went on my journey, I didn't step away from what I had been taught. I stepped away from where I had been taught. Right? I stepped away from where. So what is this? What's happening here? Okay, that's fine. I'll do that then. I went on a journey away from where. I never went on a journey away from who. I never went on a journey away from what. And by what, I mean what I believe. My encouragement to somebody would be, you know, if you journey in, I have found it very helpful to make sure that I stay grounded in the Bible. Grounded in the Bible. Right? Grounded in the Bible. Everything that I have experienced, I take and I judge it by the word of God. Principally, throughout the text. How do I see God revealing himself? Do I see this here? Yeah. That has been my methodology, right? Does it line up? Does the things I'm learning in this space or from this document line up with the life of Jesus? Right? Do this group of people line up with Jesus? Not with Adventists, line up with Jesus or the Bible. Can their presentation make sense out of this Bible thing? That is where I find the foundation. And that has allowed me to journey and to experience and to see some very different things and different people that I don't necessarily have to agree with. I don't have to agree with you. And I appreciate the journey that you're on. Don't know why that's your journey, but I know that you're on one. You see, and that has been helpful in dealing with my church hurt, in addition to acknowledging that there have been times that I have hurt people in the church.
Both end.
You know, I'm not only the recipient of church hurt, sometimes I'm the instigator. I have been. And so, again, humility. Be humble. You don't have to jump to I hurt others as well. That's not the point, to talk to a person that's been abused and say, well, you are. That's not the point. That's not the point. But the point is, as you're on the journey of humility, God reveals things. As you're on your journey to understand God in a variety of ways, he reveals things. You know, but he's not. How are Muslims converting to Christianity in the thousands if they have no connection to God? How? How are they doing it? They have a connection. They're having mystical experiences that are bringing them to a belief in Jesus, and they're doing it on the low. How? If they have no relationship to God.
Because God is there.
It's not possible if they have no relationship to God. The Buddhist lady that came around a few years ago and she was going through some stuff, and her father, or she was a nun, and her priest father dude said, you need to pray to the second God. How did he know that? She was having spiritual aha moment, big supernatural, exorcist type stuff happening to her, and she would pray to all the different deities and blah blah blah. And next thing you know, her guy says, you need to pray to the second God, and the stuff will stop. As soon as she did that, she knew exactly who the second God was, and she came to an understanding. She came over and talked to people over here. She came over and talked to some of these big name Adventist theologians and evangelists. She had the Bible translated into her people's dialect. How is she having this experience if she don't know God?
Stop thinking that God is your personal go with you everywhere person, when God is with all people everywhere, huh? He's just my friend, and he travels with me, but he don't know nobody else.
Right.
He only talks to my people. He's only part of my club. He's only in my crew. And therefore, in order to get to know him, you have to be in the club, the crew, and join up for the whole 9 yards.
It's dishonest, because the reality is, if you look culturally and historically, every people group related to God based on the geographical and sociological needs of their people at that time. The problem is that they failed to appreciate the different experiences of the different ethno-cultures and geographies, and they all went to war over the specific attribute of God that they could cling to, and that allows for an impersonation to come in, and the diminishment of the truth based on lies. It allows for that, right? It allows for that. But when I begin to think about, if we just look at ourselves, I'm an American, y'all are British, right? Y'all are British, I'm American, right?
I'll start no wars up on this podcast.
Right? But if I begin to have this conversation and I begin to reflect on that, it's like, what is the British view of God and the British experience with God that is different than the American? And why is it different than the American? What are the things they highlight in their music? Why is their liturgy the way it is? What is happening? Why is the white way of worship so radically different than the black way of worship? Because the experiences are different. It's not that the God is different.
It's the experiences of the people.
The experiences are different. And if we were to follow and appreciate the variety of Doggett does this in his doctorate. Talks about how the upper class likes to talk about the transcendence and the all-powerful and all the omnis of God. And God is love, and God is this and this. Oh, great manifest destiny, business upstop. And then you have the real intimate, immanent God. And that's the God of the Negro spiritual and the God of gospel music. That's different. Right? It doesn't mean that they're wrong about God's transcendence or God's love. It's that because they have used their power inappropriately, they don't understand the God of suffering. And we do. Which means I can learn something from that business over there about the transcendent God of all goodness and love and kindness and blah, 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 blah. And they can learn something from me about the God that comes down and is a suffering servant and did not liberate himself and was a second-class citizen from the hood and such. He can learn about the Brown experience. They can learn about that. You see?
It was a critical word that you said there, and you've repeated several times. And I would say, as we wrap it up, it's something that we all do as a discipline of ourselves. And I know that's something we hold each other accountable for. And two, we call each other up with, I just had this idea. I just learned this new thing. But it's something that I would encourage our viewers and our listeners who've managed to stay the 2.5 hours with us to say, is that learning is not a destination, it's a journey. And if you are not on a journey to learning, then you are not growing, you are not shit, you are actually just staying within a ward situation. So when you described the American situation of whiteness and the way that they worship and blackness and the way they worship, it was interesting for me as an outsider because I already heard who's defining the terms. And I'm already like, well, the fact that you're saying learn means you people have to take a step back and say, as part of my process of healing, as part of my journey towards wholeness, not only is grief a part of that journey, but learning is a part of that journey. I have to be willing to look, to seek, to understand, to actually learn as part of my journey towards healing. And I will give you this small example as we wrap up. In my journey towards healing from my own traumas, from different situations, one of the things I said to, I'm doing trauma therapy at the moment. It's my current little therapy is trauma therapy. And when I went to my first trauma therapist, she only spoke my second language, which is Dutch. So we had the entire 2-hour appointment in my second language. And I managed it, and I was so proud of myself. And then she said at the end, you know, you have a choice. You can stick with me, or we could find you someone else if that's more suitable to you. But it's up to you. You know, you have to have a click with your counselor.
Mm-hmm.
So I said to her, I have a click with you. The problem is the language. Am I going to be able to get out of this what I need if I am constantly concerned about how I am speaking and what I'm saying, because the trauma happened in English and I'm trying to explain it in Dutch? Other point is it good for me to take that moment to try and express it in Dutch, because that's going to push my language skills. It's going to push me to process my pain in a different way. Should I do this? In the end, I decided I really needed to speak to an English one, English speaking counselor, trauma therapist. And the trauma therapist I got is a very young trauma therapist. Bless her. Very lovely, young trauma therapist. And I said to a friend of mine, it's really good that I have the tools I need to go into that situation and get out of it what I need, because it is a learning process. There are tools that she has that I need. There are things I need to learn from her. But if I don't see her and understand her skills, her gift, her education, and the things that she's going to be able to teach me, I am not getting nothing out of this process. If all I do is judge her by what I see and say, oh, she's a bit young, am I going to traumatize the therapist with my story? You know, if I'm going to do that when I get in there, we're going to have a problem. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it's a learning experience. It's also about me humbling myself in those situations and saying, I don't have the answer. I need you to give me the answer. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to be transparent and honest and do those things. But it's a learning process. And I think if people get anything out of this conversation, if you've been in a situation where you've been hurt by church or you've been hurt by any institution, because you can apply it across the board to any place that you've been in, is I really want to underscore and highlight these two areas that Jason's brought forward. Dr. Jason O'Rourke has brought forward. Family, man, family.
No, get it right. Chaplain. Dr.
Jason O'Rourke. Excellent, good. Now that we've done that, is that there is a grief process that you need to go through. Don't let nobody rush you to forgiveness. I'm going to move beyond even what Jason says. So Jason said, don't let anyone rush you to acceptance. I'm like, most people bypass all of that and just go to, you need to forgive. There's a whole process, and they're like, but you need to forgive. This is where we need to be at. So you can rush through everything to get to forgiveness. Don't let anyone rush you there without actually acknowledging that whether you're there, whether you do it or not, whether you are in the forgiveness process or not, you need to go through the grief process. There's a grieving that happens that needs to really be highlighted. And then I think, secondly, what you've said over and over again is that you have to be willing to learn. When you're on the process of healing from church hurt, you have to be willing to learn. And that is not just learn about how I heal, but I need to learn about what is happening in my religious background, in my sphere. How do I learn about what this religion is, what this faith is, who this God is? How do I learn about that if I actually deal with the fact that I'm hurting from an institution that claims that? And I think I recognize what you said in the story because I've been through a similar experience. I have my church hurt and repeated church hurts from various parts of the church organization. And what I've kept consistent with is the learning process. How can I learn more about this God? Because clearly, in my mind, this is how I phrased it. In my young mind, I think it's still there in my adult mind. Clearly, the people don't know. So I best start learning about God. That's how I phrased it. Clearly, these people who are hurting me have missed something about Jesus, because the Jesus I read about don't do that. So I need to work that out from who is this God? How can I live up to this God and not do what they're doing? Because what they're doing is causing harm. So let me work out and let me be humble enough to say I need to learn about the God so that I don't lump God in with those people. Those people are not good people. And
Let me say this. Let me say this, because you're spot on. And I would say this in the church: let to the ministers, Lord, help me, to ministers specifically. It is imperative that we learn to listen to the God that our people need. What do they need from God right now? Not everything. Yes, everything to me. Yeah, tight rivet, great. And specifically, right now, they are their own, I just lost the word, it was right there. They are their own sphere of influence. They are their own ecosystem. What God is needed right there in that ecosystem. And you learn it, thank you, God. You learn it when you learn how to listen. I'm gonna give you 3 steps on listening. When you're having any conversation, but especially a pastoral one, you're going to hear initially the facts. So acknowledge the facts. That's fine. You heard the facts. Yes, your dog, somebody shot your dog, whatever it is. Okay, that's fine. Got it. Then, if you can, you want to hear beneath the facts to the emotions. You want to hear what emotions are being brought up. You want them to get them to begin to express what feelings, and by feelings, I mean physical sensations. A feeling is a sensation. It's a physiological sensation. An emotion is happening in your brain. A feeling is happening in your body. They work together, or maybe they don't. But that's how it is. Get them to start talking about that. Why? Because the goal that you want to get to is when you can get down to the level of values. If you can understand their value, you went from facts to feeling and emotions to values. If you can hear even one value that is a core value for them, and you speak to that, you bring God to the value, right? The value. I need God on this value. Okay. Now we can start talking about that. You start listening as their own little ecosystem that they are. What value do they need God to speak to? Because everything else, the behaviors, the emotions and feelings, all of that is driven and fueled by values. The values are the core of the person. It is where they connect. This is why we can't connect with some people, because we have different sets of values. And therefore our identities are different. Our value system is different. We relate to the world differently. And if I relate to the world differently than Storm, then the way I need God in my life, Storm don't need. Mm-hmm. Storm don't need it. So I'm empty now. I have nothing for him, because if I have not learned to listen to get down to the level of his values, and then just be a reflector of him, or a reframer of what he's saying, so that God can, in the space that has been created, begin to reveal to Storm, this is the God that I am to you right now. This is what I need for you. But Storm now becomes his own ecosystem. But you got to learn to listen and see each person as their own individual ecosystem with a very specific perspective needed from God for their history, for their epigenetics, for their environment, for their choices. They need God specifically. You must listen for it. You must observe it. You must listen for it, and then allow the Holy Spirit to reveal and create a space where he can reveal whatever they need to them. You simply are the sounding board. I'm done.
You said it's done.
Yeah, class is over. Dr. Rourke has finished teaching.
Well, folks, on that note, maybe Dr. O'Rourke has actually finished teaching, and we have questions that we'll table for another time. But we would like to say a massive thank you to you, Jason, for coming on today and for sharing your knowledge, your wealth of information, and your personal story. I think that's really helpful to people to hear from a very personal perspective how you actually deal with, process church hurt. I think it's very honest and vulnerable, and we thank you for setting that example for our listeners. And we're really just grateful that you have been and spent some of your time in between your on-callness in the hospital there, working with your with the patients and doing the work that you do. We're glad that you've spent this time with us. Really grateful, and bless you in your ministry and all the work that you do beyond, not only in the walls of the hospital, but beyond that. So thank you very much for being with us today. Mr. Storm, as always, a pleasure.
Yeah, before we go, look, I just would encourage anyone who's watched this or is going to watch this to share this, please, because I think there's a lot of information in here that will be helpful to someone. There are a lot of questions that have been broached in this conversation that might be helpful to someone. And one other thing, look, if you're experiencing church hurt or church trauma, I just want you to know that, look, both Pastor Purple and myself are safe spaces. However, in the spirit of honesty and transparency that Dr. Rourke has spoken of, Pastor Purple's the safest space. So if you're dealing with anything, take it to her.
Okay, so on the note of this, I would like to send a really clear message at the end of this as a caveat. And I think this is really important that we'd all probably sign up to, but I'm going to say it for myself. In the spirit of being honest about church hurt, I think that everyone needs to know, if there is a criminal action, you are safe to go to the police. If you need someone to go with you, please don't hesitate to call me. If I can, I will. If I'm in your space, in your area, in your locale, and I can walk with you into that police station to help you to go through that process, I will do that. I think it's really important for you to know that criminal actions are criminal actions, and you deserve to be safe. They deserve to be accountable, and the church does not deal with that. And thereby, you need to go to the correct authorities to ensure your physical, your mental, your spiritual and your emotional safety by ensuring that criminal actions are taken there. And if you need me to say it, criminal actions are abuse. In spousal abuse, of women, of men, of children, that's all of that is a criminal action, and you should go to your local police station and report the crime.
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter if it is done by a member of your church, a member of your family, whoever it is, please do go through that process. The processes that we are speaking about here today are not at the exemption of that, but are at the inclusion of that process.
Absolutely.
So please be very mindful that what we've spoken about here, about our personal journeys, about our personal struggles, have, in my case, included going to the police, have included reporting crimes, and we encourage you to do this because it is the right thing to do to keep not only yourself safe, but those around you safe.
Absolutely.
To keep anyone else in that position. And we know it's not easy. So if you have somebody that is willing to go with you, I implore you, take someone along in the process. It is not an easy process. It is not by any means a process that just works and does well, because we report here all the time on how police systems, etc., all fail. But it is important that you do the thing that is right for your safety. And so I think that just to underline that point, in case anyone's listening to this and has the idea that it's just a personal journey, I just want to underline the point that criminal actions deserve criminal processes. And for your healing journey, you're not in the criminal process, you're in a separate journey. They are in the criminal is in the criminal process, and you are on a healing journey. Those are two separate processes. Both are equally valid. So I just want to underline that for anyone who has listened and is listening.
Agreed.
All right. Well, on that note, we are going to end the broadcast for today.
Right.
Storm?
Yep, we're heading out. Just got one question for Dr. O'Rourke. Dr. O'Rourke, are you on any social medias? Can you tell people where to find you?
Yeah.
I do. I'm on Facebook. I have an Instagram account that I don't really use. I'm probably not that great. I don't do TikTok because I think that's a bit overkill. But I mean, I'm on Facebook. They can get at me on Facebook, no problem at all. J.A. O'Rourke, just J, capital J, capital A, and then O'Rourke. I'm there. I'll respond. It's not a problem.
Alrighty. Well, on that note, we are going to play our outro music, and we will see you next time on the dark side, when I will have a guest host, because Mr. Storm will be on vacation, living his best life, and I will have a guest host with me. Not sure what the subject is. God bless you. Peace out. See you next time.